Welcome to the Emotional Balance Sheet, the go-to podcast for parents with multiple kids, especially those with twins, triplets, or more, who are navigating the maze of modern family life and personal finance. Whether you're overwhelmed by education or retirement planning, parenting dilemmas, career transitions, or trying to define your purpose and plan, we're here to guide you with empathy, encouragement, and expertise. Hosted by Paul Fenner, founder of Tama Capital, a certified financial planner and parent to 4 kids, including a set of triplets, our podcast is your ally in the quest for financial peace of mind, proving that money matters, but family comes first. Subscribe now and join our community of empowered parents at tamacapital.com.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for investment decisions. Clients of TAMA may retain positions in the securities discussed in this podcast.
What does comprehensive financial planning even mean? At Tama Capital, it means a family office where lifestyle planning such as retirement, college, portfolio management, tax prep, and planning all are under one umbrella. But it goes beyond numbers. We focus as much on the emotional side of financial planning as we do on the financial side. We get you. We understand your challenges of building a family, business, or career, and a healthy life. We are devoted to wealth planning for families like yours because we are you. Learn how our family can help your family by visiting tamacapital.com.
What would you do as a parent to save your struggling relationship with one of your kids? Ann Coleman is a former attorney who specialized in divorce, child custody, and adoption cases. Through raising her adopted son, Ann found herself deep in research, becoming a parenting expert on how to talk with teenagers struggling with anxiety, substance abuse, and mental health challenges. Sharing the details of her own experience as a parent, Ann walks us through her extensive research on teenage brain development and how it shaped her approach to parenting and led to creating resources for parents to use. Throughout our conversation, Ann provides practical advice and highlights the need for self-awareness and intentional reactions in dealing with children's emotions. Remember, reasoning with a child during an emotional meltdown often proves ineffective. Wait for a moment to calm down, to have a thoughtful conversation. Please enjoy my conversation with Ann Coleman. Ann Coleman, welcome to the Emotional Balance Sheet podcast.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
So tell us where we find you today geographically.
Oh my goodness. Right. Okay. Yeah. Geographically, I am in the South, baby. I am way down south in Alabama. We moved here from South Carolina about 4 years ago. We moved back to my, where I grew up, a little unwillingly, but anyway, we're here. We're going to be here. My mother is 89. So we live with her. We take care of her, or she takes care of us maybe because she's pretty spry. But, so anyway, we are down south, if you can't tell by my accent.
Yes, I gathered that as soon as we got on. So I'm like, this is going to be a fun conversation.
Yeah. So
I don't have any families that I work with in Alabama, but I have families that are from Alabama. So
Oh, really? Okay. But you can tell by the accent.
Yes. So, today's topics, just to set this up for our audience, is we're going to be talking in depth about parenting. And I'm going to turn it over to you in a second for you to talk about your background and how you've gone through this fascinating, albeit probably difficult, journey of attorney to being, I think you called it a lay expert, but you're probably a better expert than most on parenting, especially teens that have anxiety, depression type of issues. And so you've built this framework that I think is going to be at the heart of our conversation today. But really what I wrote down, and I'm looking at my notes, that I noted, this is what I wanted learn or take away from our conversation today is how to build better connections with my kids, how to decrease conflict with my kids, and how to make parenting less stressful.
Right.
So
right.
those are tall orders, but knowing the background that I do of you and your experience in going through firsthand, I think you're going to be able to enlighten not only myself, but our entire audience who are mainly parents on these topics. So enough with my rambling. Let me turn it over to you, Anne, and have you walk us through a little bit about you, your background, and how you made it to where you're at today.
Okay. Well, so I was an attorney for years and years and years. I started out as a divorce attorney, divorce, child custody, adoption. We adopted my son at birth, brought him home from the hospital. And after I did that, I thought, oh, that is so cool. I got to do that. So did that for a little while, took a break from practicing law to raise him, went back to practicing law and moved far, far away from divorce and custody and all that good stuff. And went into a very niche area of helping clinical laboratories in their work so that I did not have to go to court anymore. I could sit at my desk. I could do contracts and all that good stuff. So I'm working from home, and my son, we only have one child at home. My husband has two older kids, and he, from birth, had anxiety. Looking back now, I realize what it was. So he was anxious from birth. He was high strung, hard to handle, very intense from the get-go, which was funny because if I had given birth to him myself, he could not have been more like me. So he has ADHD, he had anxiety, so do I. So as you can imagine, there was a little bit of conflict there. And so that's what happened. As he got older, my husband and I kept saying, okay, surely he's going to sleep through the night at some point. You know, at 6, age 8, age 10, we're still looking at each other and saying the same thing. He always had sleep issues. And we're like, well, you know, he's not going to be crawling in bed with us when he's 16 and driving a car. Well, little did we know, it only got worse. So the sleep issues, he never could sleep. Was it the ADHD? Was it the ADHD medication keeping him up? Was it the anxiety? You know, these were all the issues. He also had, you know, major troubles in school because of the ADHD, and he was attending a private Episcopal school, which was, you know, the rigorous work, and that was horrible for him. They did not accommodate him in the least. And he also had dyslexia. So our whole life up until about through 8th grade was about school, ADHD, the learning issues, the accommodations, and how are we going to get him to study? How are we going to get him to turn in homework? How do we do this? And so that was my focus. Those were all the books I was reading. That was, you know, the blogs and everything I was listening to. It was all focused on school. And so at the end of 8th grade, we decided we've got to get him out of this environment. This Episcopal school is not, you know, all of his friends were there, yes, but the accommodations, and it was only going to get worse in high school. When he got to the upper school, took him out, put him in public school. 9th grade seemed to go okay, looking good. End of 9th grade, I discover he's been smoking weed the whole year, and which was really interesting because all my friends at the Episcopal school were like, yeah, you know, you take them out of the school here, you put them in public school, they're going to be smoking weed in the bathroom and they're going to get in trouble and blah, blah, blah. So I'm like, okay, was that right? This is what? But no, that's not at all what was happening. He was smoking weed with a kid right down the street from us in the same neighborhood. That's where they were doing it. And so the weed smoking really kind of blew my mind because I grew up with a drug addict brother. My brother started smoking weed when he was probably 12 or 13, and it just progressed really quickly into cocaine, heroin, ended at methamphetamine or meth. I don't even know what that's short for, meth. And he died a few years ago in his 50s and had been a drug addict. He was younger than me, had been a drug addict forever. And so growing up in that environment with my parents struggling to deal with him and seeing fights and what he was doing to them and how he just broke their heart and killed them inside. my whole thing was, that is never going to happen to my child. I am not allowing that to happen. I didn't even at first, I thought I was never going to have children. But I thought, if I do, we're doing this right, and this is not going to happen. So when I found out he was smoking weed, emotionally, I couldn't handle it. I just went off the deep end. I'm like, no, you are not going to do this. So I started controlling, and I started putting my foot down, and, no child of mine is going to do that. And so the fear took over. And when fear takes over as a parent, a lot of times what we do is we try to control. And if you try to control a teenager, an adolescent, that backfires pretty quickly.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that at the time. So the more I controlled, the more he pushed back. The more I control, and the more he pushed back, the more I controlled. So it escalated to a point where he was he was really spiraling. And long story short, we ended up putting him in residential treatment for his anxiety and for, smoking weed. He was also dabbling in other stuff and trying other things. And my point was to get him fixed. He needed to be fixed. He was doing wrong, and I couldn't control it. And my husband, sweet husband, who is much calmer than me, kept telling me that I was going about it the wrong way. And no, he'd punch me in the ribs. Stop. And I just couldn't. And I didn't know any other way. And I had never read any books about this, because it had always been about school and education. And then once we got into the middle of it, I was reaching out for, problem teenager and looking at all this stuff online. And that did not lead me where I needed to go. It did lead us to putting him into residential treatment after all the counselors were, shrugging their shoulders and going, we don't know what to do. We don't know how to help you anymore. You just need to, go put him somewhere. And we did. So we're in South Carolina at the time. We put him in California, which was,
Wow.
California had him, as the kids call it, gooned, which means they come get them in the middle of the night and they whisk them away on an airplane. Two strangers come pick them up and take them. And I mean, just thinking back, it makes me want to cry.
Unbeknownst to him.
Unbeknownst to him. They come in at 4:00 on a Sunday morning. You go wake them up and say, honey, we've done everything. I've tried to talk you into going. You won't go. I love you. You leave the room. They walk in and say, son, this is what we're doing. You're going with us. And they pick them up. And if they have to, they take them fighting and biting and clawing to the car, drive them to the airport, and get on a plane and go across the country. And looking back now, I mean, it was a good decision in that it did change his environment quickly and made him, it forced him to counseling, because he would not go to counseling. So it forced him to go. They had counseling every day. It forced him to reflect and look at what he was doing to his life, even though he hated it the whole time. He was there 2 months. And then when he left there, we brought him out of South Carolina, moved to Alabama to my mother's house, because they tell you don't take them back to the same environment. There's no point.
Why is that? Do you know?
Because once you have, if they've gotten better in this environment and you take them right back to where they were using drugs and the people they were, hanging out with and getting in trouble with, you've wasted your time. They're going right back to that. And it's nearly impossible to keep them, walking a good path. So they tell you either put them in, in what is it called? I'm trying, boarding school. Now I can't think of the name of it, but therapeutic boarding school, or put them in something where it's an outpatient based kind of situation. And there are very few of those around, by the way. Now the boarding schools, yes, but he was almost out of high school. He was a senior by that point.
I was just
or
going to
going
ask,
into a
what
senior year.
age or grade was
Yeah.
all this going on?
Yeah, this was going on when he was mainly towards the end of 10th grade. 10th and 11th grade year was when it was just horrible. And then we put him in, I think it would have been the beginning of his senior year, which by that point I'd already taken him out of school. I was homeschooling him, trying to keep him away from these people. I mean, it was a mess. It was an absolute mess. And so what happened was we brought him to Alabama. This was right before COVID. It was the year before COVID. He spent a year here. And during that year, what I learned that he was only in residential for a couple of months, but during that time, we had family counseling over Zoom every week. I want to say it was twice a week. And the therapist would try to tell me how to talk to him. Like, you need to validate his feelings and you need to set boundaries, but hold firm, but do this. And I'm like, dude, I don't know what you are talking about. You are speaking a foreign language. He's like, okay, go read the book, No Drama Discipline by Dan Siegel. And that is, you'll have to put that in your show notes because it is a fabulous book. Now, I was a little confused when he told me to read this because it's for parents of toddlers. And I'm like, okay, I have a 17-year-old, soon to be 18. You want to read me this? You want me to read this book about toddlers? Excuse me. But as I started reading it, I was like, oh my God. Okay, I see, I get it. And it's all about what I teach now. It's about understanding how a child's brain works and how they interpret the way you react to them, and about your own emotions and how you have to learn how to be aware of and regulate your own emotions so that you can respond to your child in the proper way. And it was all new to me. I was like, oh my God, this is an entire world I knew nothing about. So as I'm reading this a little bit while he's still there, and then when he gets home, I continue reading and, finish the book quickly. And I started implementing with him what the book was telling me, which was basically, now I know it teaches emotion coaching. And so I started totally changing the way I spoke with him, the way I reacted to him when he had his big emotions, which he had quite often. We had all the doors, were broken in our house. We had holes in the plaster walls. He could not control himself. And when he got out of control, I got out of control, trying to control him. So this book taught me an entirely different way. And I'm like, oh my God, I have got to learn more about this. So I kind of went to the sources that Dan Siegel cited in the book, and I started reading their stuff, and I started reading about emotional intelligence, and I started reading about emotion theory, and I read the original book about emotion coaching. And then I started reading about neurobiology and neuropsychology of adolescence. And the more I read, the more I wanted to read. And I would write down the citations. And finally, I just thought, if I'm going to write down the citations and do all this stuff, I might as well write a book. So I wrote myself a book about the teenage brain and about emotions and emotion theory and emotion coaching and all this stuff. And I put it together. And as I was doing that, it was my way of learning all this stuff. That's how I learn. I learn by writing it down and putting it into kind of a something that makes sense for me.
Do you think that Ann goes back to your I guess training as an attorney?
Absolutely. I mean, that's what I learned to do in law school because I was ADHD and didn't know it at the time. So what I always did was I would read it, I would write it down, I would put it in, an outline and make it make sense to me. And so that's what I was doing with all of this stuff. And as I've done this over the past 4 years, I came up with a framework, which actually I just kind of put all that together recently, because what I've done, and this is the way I like to approach any subject, anything I've ever wanted to know, I would always, back in the good old days, I'd go to Barnes and Noble and buy 6 books on it and sit down and read all 6 books and, flip through it and write notes and put Post-its in there. And so
Barnes and Nobles, by the way, still exist audience listeners. I was actually in one on Sunday in Holland, Michigan.
Amazingly enough. Yeah. And I still love to go. And, but that's how I kind of approach this from lots of different directions. And most experts, what I've found is that most experts zero in on one area of something. Like you have someone who specializes in neurobiology, or you have someone who specializes in how mindfulness helps teenagers, or you have someone that specializes in, emotion coaching. But what I did was I kind of pulled all these disparate, separate things together and then wound them all into a framework that makes so much sense. And I wish everyone taught this framework because it's what would have helped me a few years ago with my son. And that's the way I look at it is, I want to help parents understand the direction that they need to approach their adolescence and certainly not make the mistakes that I made. So that's when I kind of, over these last 4 years, I've gradually kind of whittled away at my clients. And I'm like, nah, I don't really want to. No, you need another attorney for that. And you need another attorney for this. And then, I've hung on to like a couple so that they kind of finance all my free giveaway, helping parents right now, because that's what I do. I have my podcast. I post on Instagram. I just opened a Facebook group. And that's my goal, is to help other parents, mothers, grandmothers, whoever is raising an adolescent these days, help them understand what they need to know, because so many people just go at this the way I did, which is the exact opposite of what you need to do with a kid.
So going back to that, you had me at this point where you're having these escalations with your son, and he's getting upset, and then you raise your level of getting upset. And I know I do the same thing, and I know it's like not the right thing to do. Like I should be like not escalating. I need to be pulling back. So that way, if I pull back and am calmer, hopefully that should, lower the temperature, of my kids, whoever, or whatever one I'm having the conversation with at the time. But I guess, and like how, I don't know how old you are. I'm 47, but I've had these
a lot older than you.
long time. And so my question is, how do you unpack that, or how do you undo your own neurology mapping, if you will? Because that's really what has to happen for an adult to make that kind of transition.
Exactly. And that's now, believe it or not, there are parents out there who are quite calm from the get-go. And I don't meet very many of them, but yeah, that's part of the framework. I mean, number one is understanding your teens, your adolescents' brain, how it works, why these changes that are going on in their brain, how that impacts their thoughts, their behavior, and their responses, and their emotions. And then secondly, yes, how do I rein in my own behavior? I need to be aware of my emotions. I need to be aware of how they impact my behavior, and I need to be able to regulate those emotions so that I'm not escalating a situation. And then thirdly, you need to understand how to communicate with your child when they are experiencing big emotions, and understand how to coach them through that while maintaining your own calmness. And, and that's a huge thing. How to coach them through that. And then the other piece is the discipline piece. And that's multifaceted in and of itself. But yeah, I didn't know, I never even thought about emotions as a thing ever. They just happened to me, is the way it felt. And so you have to understand and start from the very, very beginning to understand what is an emotion. How does it happen? And how does that impact, how do those thoughts and emotions impact the way we respond to our child? Dan Siegel, I love it. In that first book that I read, No Drama Discipline, he talks about our shark music. He says, and it's so interesting, like you're walking along the beach. I can hear Jaws
playing in the background.
Exactly. And, picture those scenes from the beach. And picture, listen to some steel drum music in your head. You're in the Caribbean and the beach is beautiful and you have this wonderful music playing and kids are running around, they're screaming and everybody's sunbathing and you might see somebody running down the beach, and then switch that music to Jaws. Da-dum, da-dum. The whole scene changes. Everything's colored. Now people that are, kids that are squealing and people running down the beach, it's like they're running from something. It looks different. It feels different. So I love the way he approaches this. He says that our shark music, our background as a parent, our background, our history, our thoughts, and what's going on in our own mind color the way we view our kids' behavior and the way we approach it. So my shark music was my brother's drugs and my brother's addiction. So that shark music was playing in my head. So the instant I smelled weed on him or thought he might be doing something, it was da-dum, da-dum, and then I would go nuts. So to rein that in, you have to, number one, understand that, hey, I have emotions, and where are those emotions coming from? And what does that mean when I just go off the deep end on him when this particular thing happens? You have to, number one, a good place to start is journaling. So, and that's been scientifically proven. Journaling is scientifically proven over and over and over and over again to help you become more aware of your emotions and to be able to regulate them better. Unless you're aware that you're experiencing an emotion and what emotion that is and where that comes from, you can't hope to be able to regulate it. But once you're aware of it, once it dawned on me why I was acting the way I was acting and where that was coming from, then I was able to kind of set that aside and go, okay, that's what's happening to me. Now, how can I not let that happen again? And funny thing, when you are aware that that's what's going on, it gives you such clarity and it separates you. It gives a space in between the situation, what's happening with your child, and how you respond to it. It gives you enough space there that you can go, okay, I know this is happening in my brain because of how I grew up, and I need to take a step back from that and think about how I want to respond. You can be more intentional in your response. I call it, and a lot of people call it, you're either reacting immediately just on, whatever happens and comes out of your mouth and however you feel, or you have that space where you can think a minute and realize what's going on and then decide how you want to respond to your child instead of react. And that is what made all the difference in the world for me, was to go, okay, stop, think a minute, and respond. And the way you respond when your kid is experiencing huge emotions is, instead of going, oh my God, calm down, because that was
that's the worst thing to say to somebody, calm down.
It is the absolute. I mean, just think about it as an adult. If we're upset about something and our spouse goes, oh my God, calm down. I mean, what are you going to do? Immediately, you're I don't want to calm down.
It's like the 4th of July fireworks.
Yes, exactly. And it's the same thing with your kid. Don't tell them to calm down. Don't tell them, oh my God, it's okay. You're not even going to know these people in 20 years. You're not going to care. It doesn't matter. Chill out. None of that. What that is you are invalidating their emotions. And that is the exact opposite of
invalidate.
What you want
that's
to
an
do.
interesting
Invalidate.
That's an interesting word. Invalidate their emotions. That's
you're
never
telling them
that way.
You're silly. You're being silly. You're being stupid. You don't know what it's like to be a person yet. You don't deserve to have those emotions. And that's the way it is, with an adult telling another adult. It's the same thing. You're invalidating them. So instead of that, you validate their emotions and go, oh, honey, okay, I understand you're so frustrated right now. And this is so hard to do when your kid is going, rah, and they're, bouncing off the walls. But if you can take that moment to get a grip and go, gosh, I can see, and it almost sounds silly, but it works. I can see that you're really angry right now. So maybe you give them a minute. Say, I'm going to give you a minute. And then we'll talk about it in a little bit if they are just beyond, being able to calm down. But what helps them to calm down is being validated and saying, oh my gosh, I can see that you're angry. And, it is very upsetting when somebody tells us that we're, not cool, or when somebody leaves us out of something, or whatever it is that has happened. And you have to kind of figure out what has happened by asking, a couple of curiosity questions, I call them. And you say, you know what, I get it. I would totally be upset, or I would totally try to narrow down that emotion word for them to help them, because you're helping them understand their own emotions at that point. I understand how frustrated you must be, or I understand, you're just furious about this, or whatever it is. And whatever they're saying to you, you reflect that back and go, oh, I get it. Yeah, you're upset. You're frustrated because the coach told you, you had to sit over here, or because your teacher, gave you a C because she thought you did this wrong, or whatever it is. You validate and let them know, you know what? You have a right to feel however it is you're feeling right now. We all have a right to our emotions. You don't have to change that. But what you might need to change is how you're responding, honey, because you can't tear the door off the hinges right now, or you can't, but there's not much you can do in that moment when they are tearing the door off the hinges, other than take a step back and go, okay, whatever's happening right now, there's no way I can physically stop that when they're a teenager. And then afterwards, and you have that conversation with them, you say, honey, next time, I tell you what, when you're feeling this way, why don't you go out in the backyard? And there's a shovel sitting right over there, dig into the ground, whatever you have to. Let's just not break all the doors in the house. And, you can have a humorous conversation like that. But let me tell you what, it is not worth trying to stop that in the middle of it and reason with them when they are at the tearing the door off the hinges stage.
There's no reasoning at that point.
There's no reasoning. Their brain, the way their brain works, and the way most of our brains work, their prefrontal cortex, that thinking part of the brain, is completely disconnected. Their amygdala, the emotional part of the brain, has completely taken over, and they cannot help that. That is how their brain works at this age. They can't help it, but you can help them learn how to manage those emotions by doing just what I said, by listening to them, not interrupting them, but listening. Let them vent, let them get it out, and then reflect back what you hear them say. I understand this, I understand that. This is how, you're probably feeling this way or that way. Let them vent. And then you can help them, with that emotion word, teach them, what that emotion is. And while you're doing this and going through this nice, calm, discussion yourself, even if they're still kind of, up in the air a little bit, eventually it will come down. And another thing that you can do in that moment is give them a loving touch of some kind. Touch their arm, rub their back, hold their hand, whatever it is that you can do, because that scientifically is proven to release oxytocin in the brain. It's that same bonding neurochemical that comes out when a mother is breastfeeding, or when you're holding your baby. That loving touch will send a surge of oxytocin to their brain and help them calm down. So, there's a reason we touch our kid, in that way, and that is to help their brain take a breath. So all of these things that you're doing in the moment to help them get calm, then will, de-escalate things. And then, and only then, should you talk to them about whatever it is, misbehavior that's gone on, if there's something that they've done, if they've, in their moment of emotions, they've broken a door, or they've called you a name, or they've, hit their sister, or whatever it is, then you talk to them about that. But there is absolutely no reason, and you should never try to talk to them about what they've done wrong when they are in the middle of an emotional, tirade or meltdown.
So I'm interested, Anne, to find out like how long this transition for you took, and then probably most importantly, how much grace did you have to give yourself? Because being aware is one thing, but then being able to follow up on it is another. And there's times when you were able to do it, and then times when you fail. Because I feel like that's the roller coaster that is the word parenting.
Oh, absolutely.
It's like, that you should be de-escalating, but then you're letting my own emotions get the best of me when I still keep yelling at the kid.
Absolutely. And and even before I really knew all this, I knew that my emotions were getting the best of me. I knew that I shouldn't be yelling, but I had no idea how to rein it in, had no clue. And so, yes, you have to give yourself grace, because this is not an easy thing to learn if you've been all the way over here like I was. Yeah. If you're not quite as far as I was, it's a little bit easier. But
I think we're probably pretty similar on that spectrum, by the way.
Oh, God. And, I would be like, okay, stop, Anne. Okay, what is it I'm supposed to say? Oh, my God, I can't remember. I'm supposed to say, literally, if I'd had a cheat sheet on the refrigerator, it would have helped, because I just did not know what to do other than to say, calm down. That was my go-to. Calm down. Calm down. And so I really had to stop and think. And it took practice. I mean, when I first did it the first couple of times and didn't respond to him the way I normally do, I could see the look on his face was like, what the hell?
Who are you? What'd you do with my mother?
Yeah. He literally, and I tell people, it takes them a while to understand that things have really changed with you, and that you're not actually doing what you used to do. Because at the very beginning, it did de-escalate things a little bit. But he was still coming at me. He was still coming at me because he was expecting that fight that we always had. So it's training for both of you. But after, I'd say, a couple of weeks of going through it, then I could really start to see a difference in him. And within a year, we had a different relationship. I mean, the whole family dynamic changed. He was happier. He was less tense. He was not taking any medication, which was amazing, because he had always been on medication, antidepressants for his anxiety and all this stuff. His anxiety was getting much better. And then right before COVID hit, he decided he did not want to go to college, which that's a whole other conversation in and of itself. He was always going to go to college, and then all of a sudden, no, which in a way was a little bit of a relief because of all the ADHD, dyslexia stuff. I knew college was going to be horribly difficult for him. And so he was like, you know what? I just want to be a professional snowboarder. No, I know. So my husband and I were like, okay. He'd been snowboarding since he was a wee tot. So we thought, okay, well, and he's really good at it. It makes sense. Okay. I tell you what, he's had such a hard time. Let's take a gap year. We'll send you out to Colorado. We'll put you in snowboarding school.
I was going to say, there's no snow in Alabama.
There's no snow in Alabama. But when we lived in South Carolina, we were in North Carolina or out in Colorado or up in West Virginia.
So you can get to the mountains. Yeah. From South Carolina, you could.
Yeah, all the time. So, and we'd fly wherever, but he loved it. It made him happy. And I thought, you know what? We've been through such hell for the last couple of years. He has had such a hard time. He's doing great now. He wasn't, doing any of the stuff he was doing before, and he needs this. So, okay, gap year. We'll call it a gap year. Send him off to Colorado. Then COVID hit. Like, he broke his knee after the first few weeks. Of course, we couldn't get a refund. And then COVID hit and he had to come home. And that was 2019 when COVID?
2020.
2020. So he went back out the next year. He got really, much better anxiety-wise and everything. It just kept getting better. Went back out in 21, and he's been there ever since. And he's actually a professional snowboarder now.
Wow.
Yes. Wow.
So he actually did it.
He actually did it. He has a sponsor. He's been on the did the, what is it, national or world tour? I don't know what it is. It's crazy. I don't even like to watch the videos. It scares the hell out of me. It's crazy. But between the trees and off the cliffs and all that kind of crazy stuff. But he is loving life. And that's the second lesson I would tell parents, is that, you know what? It's one thing to want your child to be something, and you want to have a certain future for them. And you have all this envisioned when they're younger, even before they're born. My kid's you don't really realize it, but my kid's going to be this and this and this and this, and they're going to go to college, and they're going to be a frat boy, and they're going to, be a financial planner, and they're going to do all these wonderful things, or an attorney or a doctor or whatever. And my kid's a professional snowboarder. And you know what? That's okay, because he is happy. He is happy. He is loving life. He has a huge group of friends. He says, "Mom, I love going to work every day," because he works actually in a snowboard place in Christie's out in Silverthorne or Frisco. All those little places are together. And he's like, "I love going to work every day because they get like 2 hours off in the middle of the day to go snowboarding." And I mean, it's just the whole atmosphere. It's just, I'm assuming it's kind of like what it would be like in, Malibu at the surf shops. And it's the same, surfer dude, snowboarder dude. They love it. So I'm good with that. Parents, you can't force your kid to be something they're not. You cannot force your dream for your kid on your kid. You will make a miserable kid. And one day they're going to wake up and they're going to realize, I did the wrong thing. I don't need to be this or that. I didn't even really want to marry this person or live in this home. I wanted to do X, Y, and Z. And they're going to have a midlife crisis, and it's going to be bad, and they're going to blame you. So let your kid call the shots a little bit. And don't force them to be something that they're not. They will be happier. You will be happier. End of story.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more on the expectations. I feel like I've been writing about expectations for a while, and there's a strong disconnect between. I mean, obviously the higher your level of expectation, the greater the fall can be. And if you can work on level setting expectations, that is a huge win when it comes to not only your financial life, but your personal life as well, because the two are extremely tied together. And it's one thing I talk about on the show. When I talk to families I work with, is that I think there's this idea out there that your personal life is separate from your financial life. And for the people listening, you can't see this, but I always do this where I bring my hands together, that they are strongly intertwined. They are strongly interconnected.
Absolutely. And we put so much there, the mental health tragedy that's going on right now with adolescents. It's real. It's real. Kids are losing their life. Kids are on medication. They are self-harming. You don't ever want that to happen to your kid. And I mean, my son was diagnosed with anxiety and depression. He had suicidal thoughts and tendencies during that time. It is scary. It is scary, scary, scary. And the pressure that we put on our kids to excel in school, we put them in the rigorous schools, and we put them, they're in the best schools, in the best neighborhoods. And the pressure is so real. That was my very first podcast episode, I think, or maybe number 2, where I talked about the pressure that is on these kids to excel. And even if it's not the parent putting the pressure on them, it's them putting the pressure on them. They compete with each other. And now, getting into college, that's all they talk about from 8th grade on. And, it's not like when I grew up, I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to go to college. So I applied to one, I got in. I mean, big deal. It was just not the way it is now. And, my advice to parents is, grades, great. You can get into college with average grades, you might not get into the best college, but there are only few kids that are going to get in to the best college. And, yes, that's great if they can do it, but the pressure that they have to put on themselves and that you put on them to get them there just so that they will succeed, at your definition of success is not fair to them. And it's not even fair to you to put that pressure on yourself that I have to raise a kid to be this successful. Success looks different to everyone.
Yes.
And,
Very much so.
with the finances, I mean, I'm sure people come to you and say, I just want to get here. Or, you have people that want to get over here. And it's just, it's up to each person. My son always wanted to have tons of money and now I don't really think that's even on his radar. I think he's pulled back and said, you know what? I just want to be happy. I just want to have enough money to live and be okay and be happy. And, everyone has to decide that for themselves.
Throughout our conversation, you've kind of touched on this 4-part framework that you've came up with, but is there a spot where our audience can go and get that? Is that on your website somewhere? Because you haven't written the book yet, right? As far as I know.
No, I've got all that, written down for myself. So I may try to self-publish at some point, but, because I just literally within the last few months pulled this all together. I have my first online course that I've done, and it was a discipline and consequences boot camp. And so it didn't pull all of it together. That was the 4th part of the framework. But so I'm working on courses, and that's what I hope to build up to. If you listen to my podcast, though, speaking of teens, I talk about these things, periodically throughout the podcast. And, what I try to do is when people have an issue, they DM me or they call me or they come into the Facebook group and ask me a question, and that's the Speaking of Teens Facebook group, then I'll point out these issues. And so when I'm trying to help someone, I bring these issues out and I steer them towards the right podcast to listen to or the right free guides and stuff that I have. So I've created guides on almost all this stuff except for the 4th part about discipline, and that's what I did the course on. So and you can put all the links and everything in your show notes, but I have tons of free, really good, not the little freebies that you get where it's, a 1-pager and that's it, because, hey, I'm not a 1-page kind of girl. I want to give you all the information you need. So I have all kinds of good guides and a book list of, some really, really good books for people to read on parenting where I get a lot of my information. And, because I'm here to share I'm not here to hold back. I'm here to share because I don't want people to make the mistakes that I made. So I'm working on, like I said, getting programs out there and more online courses and that kind of thing. But in the meantime, I've got free information, free podcast, free Facebook group. Everything's free.
So we'll be sure to link to your website, which is
Neurogility. I thought that was cute because neuro and agility and neurogility. So yeah.
So we'll be sure to link to that where you can get all the resources that you're just talking about, right, including your podcast, Speaking of Teens. And I could have you on for probably like another hour, but let me get to my closing question that I ask all my guests.
Oh yes, I think I've heard this.
Yeah, most people listen to the show. And I'm going to be really fascinated on what your answer is. And the question is, what is the best thing about being a parent?
Okay, well, so I don't think a lot of your guests can actually give this answer because they're not as old as I am and they don't have kids that are fully grown little people. But I asked my husband about this earlier. I'm like, I know he's going to ask me this question. So what would your answer be? And he said something I can't remember, but my answer is it's awesome to see the final product. After you get through all these years of struggling to figure out what you're doing and to, parent them. And then when you get to the I hate to say end of the road because it's not really, but when you can finally look at your child and see a blossoming adult. I mean, my son is 22, which is still an adolescent. Our brain isn't finished until we're in our mid-20s at least, and maybe close to 30. But it's amazing to see that, the way he acts and the way he treats other people and how he moves in the world is so reflective of now I see how we raised him. Despite those couple of years of hell that we went through, you can see that in him. And he was always a good kid. He was a sweet kid. He just had a couple of years of, not knowing what to do, and I made it worse. But seeing that final product and seeing your child out in the world and really like cleaning their own room and washing their own dishes and doing their own laundry, even though they wouldn't do that at home and they would have never done that at home, it makes you realize that, you know what? They don't have to be perfect at home, because one of these days, just like we did when we grew up, one of these days, they're actually going to figure it out. And the things that we've taught them will, they're back here in the back of their mind somewhere. And then at some point they kind of come to the forefront and it all just kind of falls together. So that's what I tell people is, you know what? You don't still throw your wet towel on the floor, do you? And you probably pick your dirty clothes up out of the floor. So they're going to do that one day. You don't have to remind them 30 times a day. One day when they have to, they will, because guess what? Their husband's going to get mad at them, or their wife's going to get mad at them, and they're going to have to figure it out. So it all works out in the end. And I think that's the best part, is seeing that, gosh, all that hard work and all those things we sacrificed and all those things we did. Look at him. He's doing great and it's all good and he's happy. So that, to me, that's the best part.
Yeah, I knew you would deliver on that answer, Ann. And I think it to one of your final points there, I think it ties back to the piece of our conversation we were talking about with expectations.
Right.
And that's an area where my triplets will be 13 here this year and my plus one will be 11, is still having those realistic expectations and thinking about, is what I'm yelling about today going to matter 10 minutes, 15 minutes,
Exactly.
5, 10 years from now?
Exactly.
Probably not. Probably not.
Exactly. Yep. That's a big lesson. Yeah. You need to be listening to my podcast every week.
Yes. Yeah. And it's a good one too. I've gotten a few shows under my belt as well.
Yeah,
but,
thank you.
And I can't thank you for your candor and openness. I know you're an open book to begin with from, our previous interactions and listening to your show. But I think it really, helps people hear your type of story, hear your personal story, and how the things that you went through and were able to overcome to get to where you're at today. And so I can't thank you enough for being on my show and the work that you continue to do and share publicly. So
thank you. I appreciate
I can't
that.
wait for you to write that book though.
Yeah, I'm on it right now. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being a part of the Emotional Balance Sheet podcast. And I know we're going to have a lot more conversations to come.
Thank you.
I know that as a parent, there was a lot to unpack in that conversation. From understanding the brain, emotional moments with kids, shifting priorities, validation and communication. But when I think back to the points that Ann was making, is that in order to reason with a kid, a child, you have to come at it in a sense of calm, in a moment of peace. I know I struggle with this a lot, but just having this conversation with Ann really reaffirmed to me about getting in check with my own emotions first before I can be able to help my child. It's that whole analogy, getting on a plane. If in case of emergency, put your mask on first and then help somebody else. So that's one of my big takeaways with my conversation with Ann. The other would be the financial constraints that kids can have, even under normal circumstances. So again, I think this is where financial planning and emotional planning all intersect with each other. We don't live in spreadsheets. We live our lives. And I think one of the things that financial planning helps parents do is to have this understanding of what their personal goals are and emotions are and how those directly impact your financial success. If you've enjoyed this conversation, could you do me a favor? Do you know anyone else who would enjoy these types of conversations where we talk about the intersections of our emotional and financial lives? Because if you do, it's actually going to help both of us. Do you share this conversation with someone? They will think you're great because you just gave them this terrific podcast, and it helps me grow my audience. Or you can tell them to go to tamacapital.com. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Emotional Balance Sheet Podcast. Please visit tamacapital.com to subscribe to this podcast or to connect with certified financial planner and registered investment advisor Paul Fenner of Tama Capital. And please join us again next time on the Emotional Balance Sheet Podcast.